Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure and an honor to introduce our guest today, Dr. Francesca Ferrando. Dr. Francesca Ferrando is an award winning philosopher of the posthuman, lecturer, globally involved in the posthuman as an author, professor, educator, and organizer. As per Origin magazine, she is one of the 100 top creatives making change in the world, a leading voice in the field of posthuman studies. She is the author of many well known books and articles. I would request our audience to find her CV in our academia.edu profile. Dr. Subhadeep Paul and I will be in conversation with her. Professor Deb Narayan Bandyopadhyay, our Honorable Vice Chancellor Sir, can't join us today due to some urgent official meeting. He has sent his best wishes to our event. I would request our audience to type their questions in the chat box and we will choose and pick them up, keeping in mind time constraint. I would request Dr. Paul to begin this session with his questions. Dr. Paul.
Right, Sukhendu. Uh, Thanks for that lovely introduction and a very pertinent one. Francesca, it's really a wonderful pleasure to reconnect with you virtually once again. Uh, I had that, good opportunity to get in touch with you the first time with Calcutta Comparatists. And it is really a wonderful pleasure that through the institution where I work, where Shukhendu works, we are able to reach out to you once again. So it is indeed a matter of immense pleasure to have you here. Now, before we begin this interface, I would like to posit two very general questions because I think let us warm up this session a bit. We are very curious to know a lot of things from you, and keeping that in mind, the first more or less broad area of speculation is. Um, how would you, or in what manner or manners, would you redefine the term human, uh, especially in the context of your groundbreaking book, Philosophical Posthumanism? Francesca.
Well, thank you so much, Subhadeep. Thank you so much, Shukendu. Thank you so much, the Bankura University, who is investing and believing in posthumanism. I would like to really a big cheer and congratulations for the Center for Posthumanism that you have opened at Bankura University. And I would like to thank everyone who is here today. Before we go into the conversation, I would also like to take a minute to connect and to let me just ask everyone to maybe can we have a automatic silence in the microphone because it's hard to talk otherwise.
Requesting everyone to please turn off your microphones.
Thank you so much. I would also like to say that posthumanism is not only here to serve us when everything is well, but it is here to serve us when things are not going the way we may expect. And I would like to send all our energy and presence to the people who are not doing so well in general, and also to the people who are right now suffering for the aftermath of the earthquake in Turkey and Syria. And I would like to think how can we live on a planet with our knowledge and with the knowledge of the earth. So I would like to think of posthumanism also in very practical and very embodied and very real ways, not just as an academic discipline, but as something that can guide us our coexisting on this planet. And of course, this is going to be key in the reconstruction of the areas that have been destructed by the earthquake and in helping the people navigating these really intense moments. And I would say that in these posthumanism was a great help during the COVID-19 pandemic for us to realize that it was not just some malignant virus that was trying to kill the humans, but in our case was also the humans who were go into spaces that we were not supposed to go, that we need to also to respect non-human animals, etc., etc. So after that experience of the COVID-19 pandemic, when posthumanism really helped me understand our whole role in the big sphere, in the big picture, I think that we can really embrace posthumanism to address very direct and very real questions. And so I would like to really give presence and strength and hope and energy to all the people who are going through difficult situations. And those challenging moments can also be moments of transformation and revelation. So we're here for all of you. And if anyone in this meeting at one point needs to share something, we can do it during the Q&A. So please make sure that this space is for you. And so going to the important question that Subhadeep was asking about, how can we redefine the human in the light of philosophical posthumanism? I think that the great gift that posthumanism is giving us all is the freedom to understand the human as an open frame, as a bridge, as something that is not separated from the ecosphere, from the planet, from the earth. Again, we can think of the pandemic, the virus, we can think of the earthquakes. We are not separating from the macro bodies of ours, that is the earth. And also, of course, I would like to mention technology and realize that in the era of the Anthropocene, in the era of the technosphere, during which we can think of the planet as becoming a cyborg. In fact, the infrastructures that we have created are going to live much longer than the human. And literally speaking, the planet is becoming a cyborg. I would like to think of the human in the light of philosophical posthumanism as a non-dual approach to biology and technology. I would like to think of the human as unlimited potential that is embodied, but this embodiment is not a prison, is a start, is a way of departure, is a perspective. So in that sense, we can think of the sky, we can think of constellations and the stars, and think of us as part of this multitude of energies that are also one. In that sense, I would like to say that the human, in the light of philosophical posthumanism, is one and many, is non-dual or is post-dual. And it's a river, is an ocean, is connected to the environment, is the environment. And one more thing before I give the voice back to Subhadeep and I silence myself, is I would like to do a short exercise, everyone right now. And I think that philosophy must be addressed much more in experiential and experimental ways. I think that it's no longer possible to just have philosophy as a lecture where we are just listening, but we must become part of the conversation. So I would like everyone to take a minute and think themselves as part of the human, thinking of the human as an ocean, thinking of the human as a river, thinking of the human as something that is changing and becoming, emerging. So we like to think of ourselves as something larger than us. And from there, we're going to open to the earth. And we're going to think of ourselves not as someone who is living in something, but as someone who is part of all the relations that constitute them. So when we start to do that, which is also, of course, the practice of interbeing, for instance, in Zen Buddhism, is a practice of neti-neti in Advaita Vedanta. There are many, many traditions that point to the same direction. But I want to really think of us as the macro and the micro. So all the microorganisms that are who we are, that allow us to be healthy, the microorganisms inhabiting, being part of our guts, of our brains, of our hearts. We have microorganisms in all of our bodies. Our body is a holobiont is made of many different organisms. And then to the macro, as on a planet, the planet that is also a holobiont, that is also part of the cosmos. And there is no ultimate separation. And then we go expanding, and then we realize that the universe itself is actually expanding right now. And then we go to the whole realm of existence, and we think of ourselves as part of all the realm of existence. And then we go also to the realm of non-existence, because in order for something to exist, you also need to have the unlimited potential, the chaos, the non-being. And then we realize that we're part of all this great play of consciousness. It's very beautiful, the notion of lila in Hindu cosmologies, and this is a play of consciousness. We realize that consciousness is still limited, is still part of an experience, is still part of an embodied experience. So for instance, we all share human consciousness. That is why when some threads, some changes are happening in some part of the world, they usually are happening also in other part of the world. Think of the posthuman wave, which is happening pretty much everywhere on some level. And then we go from the level of consciousness to the level of awareness, of existential awareness. And that go beyond the human, because you do not need to be human to be aware. By existing, you are aware. There is an intention in order to manifest. Otherwise, there is no manifestation. The passage from non-being to being, that passage, which is a technology of existence, is part of the process of awareness. So we'd like to take everyone and really relocate ourselves in this macro and also micro map of intra-relations, where everyone is related to everything else, but is also regional, is also unique, is also one, and is also many. And why is that? Why is not everything the same? Because in order to exist, you need originality. There is another notion here that I would like to address, which is the notion of poiesis, which is a Greek notion in this case. And is the existential creativity. And if you look around yourself right now, I know that we are not in the same room, but we are in the same virtual space. So I'm inviting you to look around the room that you are surrounded with. You can look at your hands, you can look at the mirror, you can look at other humans maybe that are around you, and you see in everything unlimited form of creativity. Art is everywhere, in a drop, in a leaf, in a hand, in the way that wires connect and knot themselves very much independently. And there is this aesthetic aspect of beauty everywhere. So you can also think of existence as the play of consciousness, that is lila, and also as a constant process of creativity, which is poiesis, which goes well beyond the human. If you look outside, the rays of the sun, I know that in India you're going into the evening now, so look at the night sky. Creativity and beauty and aesthetics is everywhere. So that is one of the elements that allow for existence, is the dynamic aspect. Because when you have stasis, you have death. There is no existence. There is non-being. And when you have dynamic, when you have the movement, when you have an intention, there you have the seed for existence. So I would like to say that the human, in the light of philosophical posthumanism, is a bridge in Nietzschean terms. Friedrich Nietzsche already said that. But it's also a point of departure for unlimited creativity. And this unlimited creativity is not human bound, is not human, goes well beyond the human, and is one of the existential technologies for existence. In fact, the creative aspect of existence really surround us in everything, from technology to ecology to the layers of the mountains. And in that sense, I would say that we are works of art, and that each of you, the ultimate work of art that you can manifest is your own art that is displayed in every microsecond of your existence. And there is not one way to create original artworks. In fact, an artist is an artist because he's original. If an artist was not original, would be an imitator. So there are unlimited ways to be the art that you want to manifest. And in that sense, one of the works that we can do constantly is having a clear vision and a clear intention of what we would like to manifest. Because no matter what, we are manifesting that. No matter what, we are manifesting. So I hope I gave some insights about this important question, Subhadeep, and thank you so much.
Yeah. Right, Francesca, I can't help wonder that there is a very strong, point of ethics in whatever you talk about. And I have noticed that you have dedicated this particular lecture to the victims of the ravaging earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. So there is a point of relationality that you talk about constantly, and there is a point of interconnectedness in everything. But at the same time, I can't help but wonder that material philosophy has been in the foreground in a majority of the sections of the Western academia, and I think even elsewhere, where like the question of ethics perhaps has been a little sidelined or marginalized. Your response to that? And at the same time, would you feel that philosophical posthumanism as an idea or as an ideology would be an answer to that, could provide an answer to that, Francesca?
Thank you so much, Subhadeep. This is a very important point. I would like to answer to this question going back to the roots of the term ethics. In fact, if we look at the roots of the term ethics, we find a very interesting notion that comes again from ancient Greek. A lot of terminology in philosophy and in science in the Western canon come from ancient Greek. And the term is ethos. And ethos in ancient Greek means habits. The habit that we are manifesting in our existence. What are those habits that we are manifesting in our existence? Those are our real ethics. It's not so much what we say that we should be doing. It's not so much the ideology that we think we embrace. Really, our ethics are the way we manifest our life, more specifically in our habits of existence, our repetitions, our reiterations, those habits that we keep repeating in our lives are our real ethics. This is why it's very important to be aware of the way we live or the way we exist. Because any type of existence, from the human to the non-human, is connected to the repetition. You can also think in technological terms of programming. We've been programmed, for instance, to eat food in order to survive, to drink water in order to survive. We need to move in order for our body to be healthy. There are many aspects that are repetitive in our life that are part of being biological. And there are many aspects in our life, in the way that we exist. There are repetitions that are being given to us from humans before us. Sometimes we stop and think, is this a habit or a repetition that I want to embrace? Many other times we do not. Many other times we take things for granted because our parents, or maybe a teacher, or maybe a guru, or maybe a book, or maybe a scientific book, or maybe some external authority, because some external authority said that, then we accept it uncritically, without embracing it from the self, from the inner self. And that's when we start repeating habits that may no longer suit who we are, no longer as individuals, but also as a species. I'm going to give you some examples of that. For instance, a lot of habits that we are still holding as humans in the 21st century are deeply anthropocentric. And they do no longer suit the era of the Anthropocene. For instance, often in many societies, some people still think of natural areas as natural resources. People think, for instance, of a tree as wood, something that can be cut down and used for human purposes. The Amazon forest is still being cut at this very moment to create pastures for cows to eventually become food for humans who actually eat meat, and so on. There are many examples of this. It's also true that some humans are realizing that by doing that, we are killing our own selves. In fact, at the moment, number one reason for human death is pollution, is cancer, and eventually can become climate change due to our own habits as a species that do no longer suit the 21st century. Many humans are realizing that we need to change these habits, these repetitions, these reiterations. This is going beyond good and evil. I'm not judging the humans who are not aware of that, but it is a matter of awareness. Do we want to live as a species? Do we want to be here 1,000 years from now? Do we want to have a life that is harmonious with others, as you were mentioning? Of course, I'm going to go to relations in a second. So some humans are realizing that, and going back to the example of the Amazon forest, there are laws that have been implemented. For instance, in Ecuador, there is a whole movement that is at the legal level. And by the way, in India as well, in Australia as well, in New Zealand as well, in Europe as well, in Africa, everywhere, there are countries that are adopting at the legal level, we are not talking about ideologies, at the legal level, the rights of nature. What does it mean? It means, for instance, that if you, in theory, at the legal level, the problem is the practice that is still going on, but at the legal level, if you cut trees in the Amazon forest, you're going to have the same legal consequences as killing humans, because these trees are now seen as persons, non-human persons. And another example, for instance, is in India for dolphins. Another example is in New Zealand for natural resources like rivers and mountains that you can no longer pollute, because now these entities are seen as complex, pluralistic people. So I would say that this shift in our own consciousness is happening at every level. It is very true that some canon, for instance, of philosophical inquiry, we are, for instance, talking about mainstream Western philosophy, have been based on a separation between the subject and the object. I am here, therefore I think, or I think, therefore I am. Descartes. We are now realizing that to think is not enough to believe that we are the master of the universe. In fact, AI is thinking very well. We have an example. ChatGPT is now this advanced chat algorithm that can give you the best philosophical answers that you can find around. And that's a technological being, it's not a biological human being. I would say that with the rise of intelligent AI, the myth of the subject as the mind, in separation from the body, in separation from the others, has died, is gone, is no longer feasible. And of course, there are now a lot of movements within even Western philosophical trends as well that are completely shifting this separation between the subject and the object. As you rightly mentioned, for instance, we have new materialism, we have many different movements that are not even posthumanist. And so we have outside of the Western canon, because in order to be posthumanist, we cannot just rely on one canon. Otherwise, they would be post-Western, would not be post-human. So I would say that when we think of this realm of existence, and I'm not generalizing, because I know that there may be other realms, other dimensions. Quantum physics talk about the multiverse. So maybe in other dimensions, the law of physics are different. But in this dimension in which we find ourselves, relationality is intrinsic. There is no way we can think or understand ourselves in an absolute separation. I'm not talking about partial, playful, shifting, and merging separations. And I like to give the example of the Tao. The Tao is separated. We have a circle, we have a wave in the middle, we have two colors, and then we have two spots of the different color for each side of the Tao. So in the Tao, there is a separation, but it is a playful separation. It is a transformation. In fact, the metaphor for Taoist philosophy is water. So the Tao, at the center, we have the wave separating colors. The wave represents the water. The water is constantly transforming. It can become vapor. It can become ice. It can become liquid. It can become snow and ice and everything. So I'm not saying that there are not separations. Separations can be good sometimes. It's good, for instance, when you think of national parks. I am located in the United States. There are issues with that because these lands were taken from Native Americans. But it's also true that now in the 21st century, these areas are still kind of intact. There are non-human animals that still live there. Humans are sometimes prohibited to enter these areas, which is good. Sometimes separations are good. It's not that now the human can go everywhere and do whatever we want just because we're part of nature. Being part of something means also giving space to others. And so with this, I would like to give space to Subhadeep for the next question. Thank you so much.
Wonderfully put, Francesca. For the next set of questions, I now invite my co-speaker and dear friend, Sukhendu. Would you kindly do the honors?
Thank you, Dr. Subhadeep Paul. So my question is on the Anthropocene. Francesca, what are the problems in thinking through Gaia hypothesis in the Anthropocene? So would you please, tell us more about the problems in thinking through Gaia hypothesis in the Anthropocene?
Thank you so much, Sukhendu. So let's talk about the Anthropocene, which is becoming a very important notion, not only in the humanities, but in science, in mainstream media, even in pop culture. On one side, the notion of the Anthropocene is key for a radical shift of mainstream views. Let me explain this. So the geological time that preceded what has been now defined as the Anthropocene was called the Holocene. Holos in ancient Greek means everything, and the idea is that the human was part of everything without having a particular impact, without having a specific effect, one species among many. Now, with the Anthropocene, we now realize that the human is not just one species among many, but can be literally seen as a geological force. We are transforming the way at least the crust of the earth look and behave. The human is having a direct impact in the life and death of thousands of species. We are also living in what has been defined as the sixth mass extinction. Thousands of species are getting extinct every year, and one of the main reasons for this non-human extinction is actually human habits, some human habits. And in this, I would also like to present some of the issues that come with the notion of the Anthropocene. Because you are right, Sukhendu, not everyone is happy about the notion of the Anthropocene. The notion of the Anthropocene, on one side, is enlightening because it allows us to see us as a geological force, as a species that has agency, and this agency can be redirected. This agency can be redirected the way we want. We are part of the species. But of course, it also generalizes the notion of the human, so that every human seems part of this anthropos the same way. While we know that from the very beginning of the conception of the notion of anthropos, which come from ancient Greece again, anthropos in ancient Greek meant human, but not every human was considered human. In order to be anthropos, you had to be Greek. You had to be educated. And in order to be educated, you had to be male. You had to have possessions. You could not be a slave. You could not be a very young person, etc., etc. And in order to be anthropos, you could not be what Greek culture defined as barbarians. Who were barbarians? Barbarians were people of incredible other civilizations that were not Greek. For instance, an example that comes a lot in Greek literature is Persians as barbarians. And as we know, Persia, located in ancient Mesopotamia, is actually one of the places of birth of human civilization. So it seems very inappropriate to define Persia as a barbarian location, barbarian in the sense of without civilization. So we are starting to see that the notion of anthropos was not comprehensive of the human species, but was very specific, very ethnocentric, very Greek-centric. Now, when we think of the Anthropocene, the era of the anthropos, we incur in some of the same issues. In fact, not every human being or not every human society is contributing the way to what has been defined as the ecological disaster caused by human habits. Some nations, some societies, some people are having a much larger impact than others. And in this, we can, for instance, bring the example of native civilizations all around the globe. We can think, for instance, of the biodiversity in native lands. 80% of biodiversity right now on our planet is located in areas that has been taken care by native people, by indigenous cultures. And these same people who are actually taking care of biodiversity are also the ones who are most affected by the effects of the Anthropocene. So now we can start to see that this generalized notion of the human doesn't make everyone happy because it's not correct. And another criticism that has been given to the notion of the Anthropocene is also that it's not just the single, the one human with their own habits, the real issue. But, for instance, are big corporations. In this, someone like Donna Haraway have been very vocal about. So she, some years ago, coined the term capitalocene. So the era of the capitalistic approach, in which everything is transformed into possible capital. So the Amazon forest is no longer seen as the lung of the earth, as this temple of biodiversity, but it is seen as a place where, for instance, cows can be pastured to eventually be eaten in food chains around the world, and so on. So Donna Haraway has been very vocal about saying it's not just the human as a generalization. The problem here is big corporations and laws that are strictly connected to the interests of big corporations instead of being strictly connected to the interests of the human species and beyond that to the interests of the planet as a whole. And whole come from ancient Germanic, meaning whole. To be healthy, you need to be aware of the intraconnection of everything. This goes for our body. If I have an issue and I don't take care of that, eventually that issue may expand to other parts of my body, and eventually I might even die. So in that sense, some people are not happy with this generalization of the human, on one side because not every human is having the same impact, and on the other side because macro interests must be addressed, cannot be left in the shadow, cannot be silenced. There are big interests that can no longer be seen as interests, because these people who are profiting out, for instance, of cutting down trees in the Amazon forest are also part of a species that is directly affected by pollution, by the actual condition of our planet. So in that sense, some people have these issues with the notion of the Anthropocene. Another term that was created again by Donna Haraway more recently is the one of the Cthulhucene, which is a creative, transformative notion, which is also a direct answer to the notion of the Anthropocene. And the Cthulhucene comes again from Greek, chthonic, in the sense of the strength of geological forces. And in that sense, the earthquake has just proven how much strength the earth has that we cannot even think of, that we cannot even imagine before is actually done. So the idea is that the earth itself goes well beyond the human as a power that is not human-centric in any way. And in this, I would like to connect to the question Sukhendu had about the Gaia hypothesis. So the Gaia hypothesis is an interesting one that was developed already in the last century by two interesting thinkers, Lynn Margulis, who was a biologist, and James Lovelock. The Gaia hypothesis sees the Earth as an organism, as a complex organism, but one, not a location, as something alive that is made of many other organisms. That is why we can also think of the Earth in a term that was again coined by Lynn Margulis as a holobiont. Biont, bios, in ancient Greek means life. Holos, again, the unity, the everything, the whole, holobiont. It is very connected to a lot of ancient ideas about the planet Earth. We can think, for instance, Gaia, goddess Gaia, which was the first god in the Greek pantheon. Eventually, she was replaced, not necessarily replaced, but her hegemony was taken by Zeus. She was the first force, the first recognized goddess as the planet. And then, of course, we can think of many other approaches. Pachamama, for instance, in many Amerindian cosmologies, etc., etc. So the idea of seeing ourselves as part of a larger organism is definitely the way that, on some level, biology is actually approaching now the Earth itself. There are some possible risks. One risk is anthropomorphism. Anthropos, we have seen, is the human. Morphos means form. So it's the idea of limiting our understanding of the Earth to categories, to shapes, to ideas that actually are anthropocentric. So all of a sudden we see the planet as a female mother or as a human father of whatever we want. I would say that that is risky because the risk of bringing a specific category to an organic, inorganic, non-human entity is also bringing all that come with those categories. I think that we are creative enough to propose a new vocabulary, to propose new terminologies that are in tune with our understanding of the Earth in the 21st century. Because the Earth in the 21st century is no longer the Earth of the 10th century or of the 4th century before Common Era, etc., etc. Is literally a different Earth. The ancient cannot talk about this Earth because they are no longer here. They are here through their genetics, they are here through their wisdom, but it is our responsibility, it is our agency, it is within our power to bring an understanding of the Earth as it is, not as we would like to be, not as it should be, not as it was, the way it is. If we know, if we understand the Earth right now, we can also envision how the Earth could become, what the Earth could transform into. Maybe we would like to reverse the process of urbanization. Or maybe not. It is an individual, it is a social answer, it is a planetary answer. We need to have a lot of dialogues about this. But in order to envision, we must have a knowledge that is direct, that is experiential, that is not biased by previous understanding of the Earth or by the way we really would like things to be, or by our anger, or by our illusions. We need to be loyal to the Earth, the way it is right now, because we are that. We are part of the dynamics that manifested this Earth right here, right now. Why? Because we are the ones who are right here, right now. So I would like to say that the Anthropocene as a notion is handy, can help people switch the understanding of them as part of the conversation, being part of human agency. It should not be taken as the absolute terminology to be embraced, but as an opening, as an invitation, and a possibility.
Professor Ferrando, for your answer. Now we are living in a time of rampant climate change, mass species extinction. We have already crossed six mass species extinction, and humanity's fate is in crisis. Our existence is really in crisis. So these are some of the pressing issues. Uh, so keeping in mind all these pressing issues, how are we supposed to look at the Darwinian thoughts of evolution in the Anthropocene? Since humanity's fate is in crisis, it is in danger. So what would be, how should we, I mean, rethink, or how should we look at Darwin's thoughts of evolution? Professor Ferrando?
Thank you so much, Sukhendu. I would say that the notion of evolution is another of those key notions that allowed human consciousness to give a name to something that was becoming part of human awareness. When this notion came, we are thinking of On the Origin of the Species, written by Charles Darwin, published in 1859. He waited 20 years to publish it because he was really afraid about the possible consequences of understanding at the existential level, at the social level, the repercussion of evolution. If we understand that we are what we are becoming, if we understand that we cannot praise or blame someone else for what is happening, and if someone else could be God, could be a god, could be a goddess, could be the people before us, or could be the people after us, it doesn't matter. If we do not understand our own role in evolution, if we do not understand that we are agency, that we are dynamics of transformation, then we will never know who we are. So in that sense, the notion of evolution is key to understand at least this dimension. I'm not generalizing, because if we go into the realm of non-being, we don't have evolution. We have an unlimited void. From that void, we have the spark of possible manifestations that can exist in different realms. In this dimension in which we find ourselves, and my understanding is that this would probably suit all the possible dimensions that are out there if the hypothesis of the multiverse, which is embraced by many trajectories, including quantum physics, is correct. So even if we have different dimensions, I would believe that evolution is probably a pattern that is present in all of them. Why is that? Because in order to exist, you need some type of dynamics. If you do not have some type of dynamics, you have stasis, which means death, which means non-being. In that sense, I would say that every dimensional realm is evolving. They are probably all connected to But that we are not going to go into in this question. So when we think of evolution, it's something that we are. Again, many traditions of thoughts address this. Another one is Buddhism, with the idea of the non-self. If we think who we are, and I try to define who I am, I constantly reach the point of understanding that I'm not that. Why is that? Because I am constantly changing. I am a river. Who I was even 1 minute ago is not the same than what I am right now. Even my biological cells are changing, are shifting, are dying, renewing, reborning. So I would say that evolution is key. I would also say that the notion of Darwinian evolution on some level is a bit outdated. Why is that? Because in the Darwinian understanding of evolution, in this case, for instance, human, is seen as adapting to the environment or adapting to the surroundings. For instance, the survival of the fittest. So, for instance, you have the notion of adaptation, the notion of the survival of the fittest. So, in this sense, you have an entity, an organism, that in order to survive is constantly in almost a competition with what is surrounding them. This understanding eventually became something much more radicalized in what became Darwinism, which is not Darwin thought, which eventually became the idea of eugenics, the idea of some people being better than others. So they should have the right to exist, but not the others. The idea of the competition of what has been defined more recently as the selfish gene, according, for instance, to Richard Dawkins. I would say that all of that, scientist, Darwinist, which is not Darwinian understanding, is outdated. In the era of the Anthropocene, or of the Cthulhucene, or the way you want to define it, we now know that it is not only the human, for instance, who is adapting to the environment, but that is a co-evolution, is a co-adaptation, in which, for instance, the environment is also adapting to the species that are part of that. There is not ultimate separation. So there is not a subject, for instance, the human, who, in order to survive, must adapt to the environmental object. Is instead a co-adaptation, a co-evolution. And in that sense, if we still think of the survival of the fittest, we are really missing on another important layer that was underlined by someone like, for instance, Lynn Margulis. Lynn Margulis was this incredible biologist who came with many different notions. We've been talking to her idea of the Gaia hypothesis, to her notion of the holobiont, but also to the notion of symbiosis. Sym, in ancient Greek, with, biosis, bios, life. So that one of the main characteristics of life, in order to survive, is not so much competition, which also exists, but is symbiosis, is, in other terms that are more philosophical, coexistence. And so I would say that the notion of evolution is absolutely fundamental and doesn't have to be the only term that we embrace. Again, other traditions say pretty much the same things using terms such as becoming or such as non-self, etc., etc. On the other side, scientifically speaking, the Darwinian notion of evolution was absolutely fundamental to the birth of evolutionary biology, but now, which is more than 120 years later, it is somehow outdated. We can no longer think of this notion in absolute separations. They are related, going back to the point that we made before about intra-relationality of existence. So from this perspective, we don't have evolutions, we have co-evolutions. I hope I answered.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Francesca Ferrando. Yes, I had actually, I thought this way, and thank you for confirming that again. And my next question is a little bit different. It's not directly related to the previous two questions, but of course they are interrelated. Francesca, do you believe that Karen Barrett's ontopistemic framework of essential realism might be useful in thinking about the other wisely? So, what would be your take on this issue?
Thank you so much, Sukhendu. I think that Karen Barad's work on matter is one of the most important works that have been done in what can be defined as posthuman ontology. She is part of a specific flavor of posthumanism, which has been defined as new materialism. And she is also one who really comes with an understanding of matter that is deeply, radically, completely posthuman. There are other thinkers within what has been defined as new materialism that are trying to embrace matter in dynamic ways, but they stay in anthropocentric and anthropomorphic ways. Karen Barad does not do that. Karen Barad allows us to understand that in this merging of nature and culture, which was the main goal of postmodernism really addressed the separation of any strict dichotomy. Dichotomy is an absolute duality, an absolute dualism. So again, going back to what we said before, it would not be the Tao, because the Tao is merging and transforming. A dichotomy is an absolute separation between one and the other. This absolute separation can often result in a hierarchy in which one term of this absolute duality becomes the plus, while the other becomes the minus. And there are many examples of this. All of them stem from one of the original dualisms that can be found in many traditions, not only of ancient Greece, which is the separation between mind and body. We did refer to I think, therefore I am. Descartes really summarized that understanding, but is not only of the Western canon. Can be found, for instance, in the absolutization of the notion, for instance, of Maya in many Hindu philosophies, according to which my body is not reality, is not the absolute reality. A deep separation, a radical separation, an absolute separation between consciousness and embodied reality. We can find this in many other traditions. So this original duality, dichotomy, stemmed into many others. For instance, the separation between nature and culture. We can bring again the Greek example of the idea of classic Greek, in which the human, the educated human, paideia, was the plus, and the wild, savage nature was the minus. Another one is the separation that we've been referring before between civilization and the notion of barbarian, that is still being used to support many wars. And I remember, for instance, during the war in Iraq, the narrative used was the idea of bringing democracy to a barbarian country. So we can still see these political consequences of the misunderstanding of humanity and of the misunderstanding of who we are. Another example is the dichotomy between the colonizer as the plus or the colonized as the minus, in, of course, imperial philosophies, and then we switch that in nationalist philosophy, where that becomes the reverse. So the dichotomy can be reversed. For instance, think of sexism. Female as the minus, male as the plus, and then with some radical separatist feminism where the female become the plus and the male become the minus. So once you have a dichotomy, you have a contrast, a conflict that can be switched. No one, as Martin Luther King says, no one is going to stay to be a slave forever. So this dichotomy can be switched, but it's still a dichotomy. Or as Friedrich Nietzsche would call it, still the lion who is trying to protect themselves but cannot create yet. So even if you have a rebellion out of these dichotomies, you still are into the dichotomy. Going back to Karen Barad, she focused on the dissolution of boundaries that was embraced by specifically feminist materialism within the field of postmodernism, of the idea that nature and culture cannot be separated. But that approach, which was eventually called post-structuralism, really gave the privilege to culture. In that sense, the idea is that we are the way we are taught we are, and we can always transform that. So Karen Barad said, everything matters, body matters. She refers to a beautiful book by Judith Butler. Everything matters, but matter does not matter anymore. So she goes to matter as this unlimited, generative, dynamic force that she reads through quantum physics. In fact, Karen Barad, she did her PhD in philosophy and in the history of science, but she was trained as a theoretical physicist. So she has a deep understanding of quantum physics. And her book is deeply scientific as well, not only philosophical. And of course, philosophy and science in the history of philosophy were not separated. most of these philosophers were also scientists. Example, Pythagoras, mathematician, philosophers, vegetarian, etc., etc. So Karen Barad really brings the notion of matter to a dynamic, generative force that we are part of, that cannot be simplified in humanistic nor anthropocentric terms. I would say that in the history of posthumanist philosophy, her book, Meeting the Universe Halfway, is a stone, is a necessary book to understand posthumanist ontology. There are other books that talk about new materialism, that offer an understanding of matter in generative terms. Some of them are still very human-centric. Her book is not. So I would highly recommend her book for any class taught about posthumanism if you enter the realm of ontology. And I would really recommend as well Karen Barad as a speaker at any event. I had the luck to meet her in person at philosophical events where she was the keynote. And she's not only one of the most brilliant minds of our century, but she's a very kind and present human being. And I never saw any keynote speaker doing this. I never saw anyone doing that. I don't do that. I never saw anyone do it, but Karen Barad would go to any presentation from early morning to the night at this conference, listening to everyone, asking questions, participating, even when she was not part of the panel, even when she was not part of the discussion. She would go to everyone, listening to what they had to say. And she had such an humbling, kind attitude. I was deeply touched, not only by her intellectual rigor, but by her presence. So I would say that if you conceive of other conferences where you need a speaker, she's an incredible intellectual force, and she's a truly precious and unique human being.
Right, Francesca, and I know that we share the spirit of this humility that you also exemplify to a very considerable degree. We thank you for your observations. Now we switch to the third part of this lecture, and I have some questions which have been kind of suggested by our honorable Vice Chancellor, who, as we already mentioned, due to a very urgent official purpose, couldn't be here, but who has expressed his deepest regards for you and the work that you do. Professor Bandyopadhyay has basically asked two or three questions related to a classical understanding of criticism and all that, because he has a deep interest for classical studies. And these are two, I think, technical and generic questions as well. How are Aristotle's accounts of bios and zoe relevant to posthumanists? That's the first question, Francesca.
So much, Subhadeep, and thank you so much, Professor Deb Narayan Bandyopadhyay. I'm very happy to be able to be in conversation with you virtually, and I'm sure that we will have other opportunities to meet and to have longer conversations about posthumanism. The question about Aristotle's accounts of bios and zoe is very relevant. In fact, we can think of that as one of the starting points of Western science. It is a point that is not neutral. This separation is not innocent. In fact, as we briefly mentioned before, the notion of bios and zoe both refer to life, biological life. But one specifically refers to human life, bios. biology, biocentric. And the other one, zoe, refer to non-human life. For instance, the zoo, for instance, zoology. Now, it is true that categories can help if they are taken in no absolute ways, if they are taken, I would say, strategically for specific purposes, as some post-colonial thinkers would suggest. But I would also underline here that at the birth of Western science, we have a dramatic split between, or I would say a dichotomy, between one life, which is bios, which is the life that can be educated, which can have paideia, which can give birth to civilization, to science, to the intellectual question, who am I? That is bios. And then we have the other part of the spectrum, which is zoe, which is also what can be represented as the untamed, the undomesticated, the wild. Now, this separation is not neutral and has been forging and creating anthropocentric views since the birth of, we could say, the Western canon, if we locate that in the Greco-Roman philosophies and approaches. So in that sense, it is very important to be aware of this separation. And it is very important to understand that this separation in biological terms, once we have Darwin, once we have even the idea of, with Linnaeus, the categorization of biology, once we have a biological approach to the human, we understand that the human is not separated from the zoe. Think of genetics. We share 98.5% of our DNA with bonobos and chimpanzees. We share 50% of our DNA with different trees, for instance, fruit and bananas and apples. We share our DNA in a non-dualistic way with the rest of the realm. So, although specific categorization may be useful for specific purposes, we should now understand that this great divide, that this dichotomy between bios and zoes, in the light of evolutionary biology, in the light of genetic awareness, does no longer suit our understanding of the human. And in fact, with genetic engineering, this has become very clear. We have now the possibility that are already being embraced of mixing and shifting genes from different organisms. Of course, these open different ethical questions. But at the base, scientifically speaking, we can no longer support a dichotomic approach where the human is presented as bios and where the non-human is presented as zoe. Because we now understand that the human and the non-human share most of their DNA. And even as a human species, we cannot be generalized. In fact, none of us share the absolute same genetic code. We share 99.9 of genetic code, but first of all, with epigenetics, this genetic code can manifest differently in each of us, depending where we live, our habits, how much we exercise, what we eat, etc., etc. So I would like to say that it is important to understand this split at the very birth of Western science, because in the 21st century, this absolute divide does no longer suit us.
Right, Francesca. His second question, I think you have talked about in a very broad and rambling way also in the course of your discussion. But to locate the question in a very concrete manner, could we locate the genesis of Western anthropocentrism in Greco-Roman culture? That's what he asked.
That is such a great question. I would say that when you have a great shift, so for instance, we can think of the Paleolithic time, where the divine was considered hybrid, was considered mostly female, but not female in separation from male, because female was seen as the generative force. So most of the figurines that we have from the Paleolithic time are female force hybrids. They have peaks like birds. They have tails like snakes. They are not just human. They are not just female. And then we have a shift, for instance, with the beginning of patriarchy, with the birth of so-called civilization, with the shift from nomadic life to sedentary life. And that is going to take some thousands of years, but eventually this shift happens. And now we have another shift. That is, for instance, the post-human approach, in which we understand the human no longer in separation from geological forces, non-human animals, etc., etc. So I would say that when there are great shifts, such as, for instance, the one that we are talking about here, the anthropocentric shift. So when we have a shift from, for instance, the idea of everything as divine to a specific focus of the human as somehow spatially divine, because is the one who can bring the word, who can reflect, who can talk about it, who can verbalize what many other entities may also be experiencing. But of course, they would experience that and verbalize in ways that are non-human. So when we have a shift, for instance, the anthropocentric shift, I would say that it is very hard to just give the praise or the guilt to one or two specific cultures. It is true that in the Greek culture and in the Roman culture, we definitely see something that is changing. We definitely see a voice that comes with the notion of I am, and I am, what am I? I am human, first of all. I am human. And of course, as we said, this human is hierarchical, and not every human is seen as such. But it is an imprescindible part of the subject. So the subject in Greco-Roman approaches must be human. Of course, not only human. As we've seen, not every human had access to define who is the human. So it is a very interesting question, the one that is posed. I would say that it is, for sure, we can say that some of these new waves that come with seeing the subject as human definitely can be traced in Greco-Roman culture. But because it's a wave that eventually it became a part of a much wider consciousness, I can not only see the seed of that there, because I am not a Western-centric thinker. I think that Western ideas have been influencing many spaces, and so have many other ideas have influenced many other spaces, including the West. So I would say that it is definitely one of the locations where we see the seeds of anthropocentrism being nourished and eventually flourish in what will become eventually, thousands of years later, the human as the one who replaces God. From humanism, in which now the human is seen as divine because it has the sparks of God, for instance, the Renaissance, to the death of God with Nietzsche, and of the 19th century, 20th century, end of the 20th century, we have the idea of now God has died. Now we have the human, the superhuman, as Nietzsche would say, that can be born out of the ashes of the death of God. So I would say that yes, there are seeds there, but we cannot limit our understanding of this shift from a holocentrism that were animistic societies, because for 99% of our history as a human species, we have lived during the Paleolithic time, which were nomadic, which were really based on an animistic understanding of the self, not as the human. The human was not separate from all the other species, from nature, because it was totally part of the cycle of existence. So when we see the human separating from the rest of the cosmos, is in many traditions in which we now have the human having the free time to inquire, to think, which is not good or bad, but it is a shift in the history of humankind. So I would say yes, some of the seeds of this form of anthropocentrism can be placed in the Greco-Roman traditions, but it is a shift that is happening in many other traditions, in the Chinese tradition, Hinduism. There are so many ways in which the human now has a voice. And now the human now is located as someone who can ask the question, who am I? Become the witness. The human can become the witness. In order to become the witness, you need some type of separation. That's why eventually, in contemporary Advaita Vedanta, someone like Maharaj says there is no separation between the witness and what we are witnessing. So going back to the question, yes, there are seeds of anthropocentrism in the Greco-Roman tradition. It is also easy to go to those traditions because those traditions have been studied a lot. And as we were talking at the very beginning of our conversation, our existence, which is both individual but also social, happens through repetitions and reiterations. So it is important to acknowledge the Greco-Roman canon. But if we want to be posthumans, we cannot only focus on those canons. We cannot only go back to those canons. We need to embrace all human civilizations or beyond civilization, all human thoughts and inquiries that have been expressed beyond the written canon, because many traditions were not written. For instance, many Indian traditions were oral, because it was based on the guru teaching verbally, orally to the next generations. It was an embodied form of teaching. Now, I would like to say that the seeds of this understanding of the human as the self is inquiring can be traced in Greco-Roman tradition. We should never just focus on one tradition unless we specifically decide to do that. And also that there are many other ways to inquire into the human that are not written, that are not verbal. Think, for instance, of many ritual dances that are existential, that are a way to relate and to quest the human in connection to the other spheres of and energies of existence. So yes, it is true. Your question is true, but it's also part of the answer, and we cannot stop there. Sukhendu, your microphone is not turned on.
Yes. Thank
Yeah,
you, Francesca.
yeah, please.
Professor Bandyopadhyay has one last question, and he asks, how is Nietzsche's Übermensch relevant to the post-humanist?
That's a very, very important question. Again, when we stay in the Western canon, there are other examples that we could bring for similar understanding of the Übermensch. For instance, we can think of superhuman notions in, again, Indian tradition, since this is a beautiful conference that is physically located in India. For instance, we can think of the idea that the human is the constant overcoming of our own limits. So in that sense, the Übermensch is foundational to this idea of being a bridge, being unlimited potential. But there are also some problematic aspects when we think of the Übermensch. And I say that with full respect, because I am personally a Nietzschean scholar. Nietzsche did have a huge impact, not only to my own philosophical perspectives, but also to my own existence. I had the opportunity to study Nietzsche when I was very young. I studied Nietzsche when I was 16-year-old. And the notions that are expressed in Thus Spoke Zarathustra literally helped me navigate my own life. Specifically, the idea of the Übermensch as the one who can accept the thought experiment of the eternal recurrence of the same. Now, in India, there is the notion of reincarnation, which is similar to this, but is a little different. So according to Nietzsche, this is a thought experiment. He played with the idea that this could be an actual reality, as many traditions in India also propose, but he did not publish those private notes. So we know that he definitely embraced this as a thought experiment. And he says, what if your life would come back to you exactly the same forever? Now, there is a little different with the notion of reincarnation, because there is no transformation. There is no, nothing is different. It's exactly the same. That's why you can see why he's thought of this as a thought experiment. So he says, what if your life was going to come back exactly the same forever and ever? And he meant everything. All the people you met, the food you ate, the thought you had, the action and reaction you embraced, everything. He asks, would you say yes to your life exactly the way it is, exactly the way it has been, exactly the way it will be? Yes. Would you say yes to that life? If you would say yes to that life, he calls you the Übermensch. The Übermensch is the one who can say yes to their life because they have been living their life as their ultimate form of art. Creativity is very important here. The Übermensch is also the result of the transformation of the spirit. He calls this the metamorphosis of the spirits. And there are three phases he talks about. The first one is the camel. The camel is a beautiful animal that has been domesticated for way too long and has been used. The camel is used to say yes, even if the camel would like to say no. And I was in Egypt some years ago, and I was in the desert. And I remember very vividly, there was this camel. And the camel in the middle of the desert was resting and eating some grass, some sparse grass that was there. And the human was trying everything they could to get the camel to stand up and carry all the bags that the camel had. And the camel was not interested. No, the camel was eating the grass. And eventually, after the human insisted, the camel, boom, raised on their legs. And very unhappily started walking. The camel knew that there would be no way the camel could say no. So the camel represents the student. When we are part of a society that we don't understand yet, and we are studying, we read a lot, we also read things that we don't like, we read things that we don't agree with, but we absorb all this energy, all these knowledges, without necessarily a critical view. We only say yes, even though we would like to say no. And the camel cannot create yet, because the camel has too much burden on their shoulders, too much stuff on their shoulder. The camel is not free. So according to Nietzsche, eventually the camel rebel and become the lion. And the lion is the one who says, now is no. Enough is enough. I'm no longer going to accept all of this. And you can think, for instance, of the rebel. You can think, for instance, of many revolutions. You can think, for instance, of someone who has been discriminated against, who eventually say, enough is enough. I'm no longer going to tolerate you discriminating me, because you don't have the rights to do that. So the lion is a very important stage of liberation, of freedom, but is not absolute freedom yet, because the lion still must take into account their own protection. The lion must protect themselves. And I would ask maybe to have no. All right, I was muted. I was talking about the lion. So the lion cannot create yet, because the lion is trying to protect their own freedom. And so according to Nietzsche, these are all important stages, but the only one who creates is the last one, when you transform into the child. And the child can only say yes because they want to say yes. And they can only say no because they want to say no. A very young child is not going to be eating if they're not hungry. A very young child is going to be showing very clearly that they want to eat. A very young child has no categories in their mind. A pen can be anything. They can smell it, they can throw around. A pen is not necessarily something to write with. So I would say, and then I'm going to take a break, some water. The Ubermensch, give me 1 second. I have a call going on. 1 second. The Ubermensch is very important, but is still human-centric. So according to Nietzsche, you have the Übermensch, that is the highest concept of the human, and then you have the human, that is almost the highest concept of the animal. And he brings the Übermensch in the example compared to the human, and the human compared to the apes. And he thinks so that the apes are just making us laugh, that they are less than the human. So I would say that the Übermensch is very important, but it's still based on a hierarchy, according to which there is the non-human animal that is less than the human, and then you have the human that is less than the Übermensch. So although I think existentially speaking, the Übermensch is teaching us a lot, philosophically speaking, we need to be cautious with that.
Right, Francesca. Yes, now I think we can officially take the questions from the audience, but let me also mention that we have a time capping, we have a time constraint, so it might not be possible to take in all kinds of questions that have come up, but I will definitely try to select the most important ones, or the most loaded ones, if I might put it that way. Let us go to the chat box and proceed in a linear order. The first question is very interesting. It refers to the idea of cyber coolies in the Indian context. And let me very briefly tell Francesca that in India, they are kind of regarded as either unskilled or semi-skilled native labor force, but usually working for the BPOs and call centers where business is outsourced. And it's largely because the pay is cheap by the ones who hire them. They are known by different names as well, like the arrivistas or cyber, sahibs in one particular aspect, or technobraceros. So this is also, I guess, slightly pejorative. If you might respond to that, Francesca. Yeah.
Thank you so much, and I love the insights on this. I was wondering again, what is specifically the question about this? Can you repeat the question? I was not able to find it in the
Yeah,
chat.
yeah. The question is, such incidents where people of developing countries are addressed as cyber coolies, for instance, in the Indian posthumanist context, ain't such notions should be taken into consideration instead of being overlooked?
Yeah, that's a very important question. And of course, this is go with an aspect that we have not addressed yet. I also want to apologize. I do have a cold going on, and eventually my voice might disappear. So yesterday I had no voice. Today I have the gift of the voice for this conference, but I feel that the voice is disappearing. So I think soon I will have to go back to my body and heal myself. But yeah, so I would say that it's something we have not addressed yet, which is we did address it briefly with the notion of the capitalocene. And this, the aspect of economics. And it's something that we need to address because it is at the base of many dynamics that are actually manifesting human life, people life, that is not separating from what we have been addressing. So in that sense, for instance, the idea of people who are in different countries working with very low wages, working for countries where, for instance, the wages would be very different. It is part of what has been defined as neoliberalist approach. And I would say that many people within the posthumanist approach, I want to make a difference here, because when we're talking about transhumanism is a very different discussion, especially when we're talking about economics. But I would say that within the posthumanist perspective, many people are highly critical of this neoliberalist approach. And where we have, for instance, one of the results that you are talking, and also the other aspects that we can bring to the conversation, for instance, technological unemployment. So at the moment, we're talking about human beings who are paid very, very poorly. And also we're talking about many other humans who are actually, for instance, losing their jobs, not because of other people in other countries being paid poorly, but because of technology. And we see these rates going higher and higher. And one of the things that used to be said is that, well, intellectual jobs are not going to be taken over by AI. But recently, for instance, with the development of Chat GPT, we can see that eventually even intellectual work could be taken at least partially it is already been taken partially by machines. So this is when we need to really understand that economics are not something that we can dismiss. It's not something that we can say, oh, well, I'm a philosopher and I'm talking about theoretical philosophy or ontology. Economics are deeply part of who we are. And if we look again at the roots of the notion of economics, we find the same connection between economics and ecology. We already said that the human must be relocated as part of the ecological realm. And eco comes from ancient Greek again. Oikos means home. Oikos means home, the place that we are, our home. Ecology, logos, the discourse on eco, the home, our home. The same goes with economics. Eco, oikos, again, the home, and nomos, the account on the home, the financial accounts, for instance, of our home. I would say that it is very important to take everything into consideration, the economical aspects, the ecological aspects, the technological aspects, because they are not separated. We've seen in the past this idea that, oh, let's address this aspect first, and then eventually we will address these other aspects. And that eventually never comes. The only way we can do as posthumanists is start from a hybrid understanding of existence, where we are taking all these dynamics at play in order to understand who we are. So that's why we can reconnect again the notion of the Anthropocene with, for instance, the Capitalocene, or another notion that we didn't mention before by Giussi Parrica, which is the Capital Obscene, which connects very well with what this person kindly was asking about, for instance, people who are paid poorly in other countries. And in the case of Giussi Parrica, is also referring to the ecological devastation that, for instance, the Anthropocene is causing. But this Anthropocene is based on capitalistic values. That's why he called capital obscene, the obscenity of capitalism. I would say that we need an evolution. I no longer believe so much in a revolution that is starting from a violent standpoint. And in this, I think the history of India really has been teaching to us all with, for instance, the idea of satyagraha, the non-violent approach of searching for the truth in order to change reality. So in that sense, I would say that when we understand the intraconnectedness of existence, those people who are poorly paid in countries and the companies that are paid them are based in other countries, we understand that we can no longer think, at least legally speaking, through nations. And this applies to many different understandings of the posthuman. Another one is human enhancement and genetic engineering. You can have some nations say, for instance, no, we are not going to allow genetic engineering humans. But if another nation say yes, it's the same, because the human is one species. So eventually, the genetic aspect of, for instance, those humans who have been genetically engineered is going to eventually merge with all other humans. So it is very delicate, because you don't want to go into global politics, because the risk of the global is silencing the local. But it's also very important to understand that sometimes the separation allows for great injustice, where some things that are not allowed in a country are taken to another country and done that from companies that actually were based on a country that would not allow that. So it is a intricate transformation. I would say that it's very easy to get really frustrated and angry about the way the human is manifesting in the 21st century. But if we look at the history of the human, an example, for instance, is the history of Buddha. Before he became Buddha, he was Siddhartha Gautama, and he was a prince living in a very privileged place, in a very beautiful castle with everything he wanted. Outside of the castle, people were living in misery, dying, sick, death. And he became the Buddha once he left the castle and understood that that was everything that was happening, that the other one was a delusion of separation. So in that sense, I would say that it is very important to understand where we are at in order to change. And this change is not brought so much in the long term by violence or by anger, but is brought by deep realization. They come at many levels, which is, of course, the individual level, is the social level, is the scientific level, is the academic level. And always be aware of the fact that there is no ultimate perfection outside of the location that we choose to exist in. So going back to your question, and I think that after this, we might have the chance for one more question, and then I will have to leave because I have another event at 11. I would say that economics must be embraced by posthuman thinkers. We need to be brave to rethink this in a way that does not necessarily go into the great dualism of capitalism or against capitalism. I think that notion of capitalism does no longer suit us because we can no longer look at others or at the earth as possible capital gain. It's just something that is fit an idea of the past in which money was the ultimate salvation, in which goods were the highest happiness. Now we see many people in countries that have a lot of goods, a lot of money, they are completely unhappy, suicidal. One of the suicides in very rich countries is much higher than other countries. So we know that is not the answer to existential awareness. In that sense, what we can do is bring in the conversation as posthumanists that is not just fixed in philosophy or science or ecology or economy, but connecting all of these in platforms that allow discussion that eventually bring change at all the levels, the political level, the economic level, most importantly, at the level of the life of all of us.
Right, Francesca. Transformation and awareness are definitely interconnected, and that's what you keep insisting on time after time. In continuation with what you said, I'm going to take one, final question, and this one is interesting because it has a take on Heidegger, and not only that, it has a kind of query which is based on cryogenics. I'm going to read it out for you. You've spoken on death. I have observed that Heidegger's notion of Gestalt regarding the ontology of death gives us new meanings when we see cryogenic bodies are being preserved. What do you think of this event while death itself is the most authentic experience of Dasein? The ontology of death harbors within itself the sanctuary of being. Death is as an event rescues the being from the logic of positionality. So I guess that was an observation, but the question was, what do you think of this event while death itself is the most authentic experience of Dasein? Francesca.
That's a great question. Yeah, so let's take a step back to understand a little more Heidegger's take on death. Heidegger was a Nietzschean scholar. He taught different courses on Nietzsche. He was greatly influenced by the notion of the Übermensch and by the notion of the metamorphosis of the spirit that we've been talking about before. Heidegger brings another question to all of us in order to access existence, in order to understand who we are. We are Dasein, according to Heidegger, is being there, being in, being with. In fact, Heidegger is one philosopher that really brings relationality to the ontological discussion earlier on. And according to Heidegger, when we really, truly, authentically think of who we are, we understand that death is an existential key to our awareness. In fact, he says that we are always, our life is towards death. Death can become the key to understand what kind of life do we want to manifest. According to Heidegger, there is a very important notion. That is the notion of authenticity. How can we be authentic to ourselves? And again, in this, he's a Nietzschean scholar outside of any external authority. Of course, the question is what is external? In approaches like Advaita Vedanta, there is no separation between the in and the out. But of course, external would be something that is imposed upon the self without being part of the self, something that the self should accept just because it was there, almost like a dream of the past, that because it's been dreamt by people who came before us, then we should revere. For instance, capitalism is a dream of the past, does no longer suit the 21st century. That's why we do not need to be loyal to capitalism. We can only rephrase, reshape, reimagining, envisioning new ways of economic existence, because capitalism does no longer work. It's killing us. It's killing our lungs. It's killing our resources, seen as resources that are not resources. It's part of our body, the macro body of the planet, that we are killing, thinking of something that we can use to sell, to make it a profit. So in that sense, Heidegger uses the notion of death in a very existential way. It is also, if you want, a thought experiment. Again, he was a Nietzschean scholar. We could think of death as a thought experiment. If you were to embrace your death radically, completely, aware that we are going to die, that there is not ultimate immortality, at least in the way we know ourselves. So if we were going to do that, what kind of life do we want to live? To which life would we say yes? The sacred yes that Nietzsche was talking about for the Übermensch. So it is very interesting to ask about cryonics and cryogenic bodies, because once, for instance, you are in a path in which death is no longer that you embrace as part of your existential path, if you don't have an end to your life, what kind of life are you going to be living? And it's interesting because if you ask people, do you want to live forever? Usually, at first, people say yes. And then you ask, okay, think about it now. Take 5 minutes and think about that. You're going to be living forever. And if you do this with your students, because it's very interesting, after thinking about it, and I've been doing this for years, because I've been teaching these topics for 10 years, and so after my students think about it, and I always say there is not right or wrong. There is not a right or wrong. It's your own choice. It's your own life. I'm not going to tell you what is good or what is not. There is not right or wrong. But after they think about it, most of them, and usually it's like out of 25 people, let's say in a class, it would be 22 would say, no, I don't want to live forever. 2 would say yes, and 1 say maybe. And why is that? Because then they say, well, first of all, you don't have, what are you going to do with all this life? And also a lot of the things that we feel that we are supposed to be doing in our life, for instance, taking an exam, for instance, studying, for instance, being in competition with others, is that going to be forever? Now I have 1 PhD, now I should have 5 PhD, should have 100 PhD. When does that competitive approach going to end? So I think that the notion of death is very important. I think that COVID-19 made this understanding of death that Heidegger already proposed very, very clear when people around us were dying. Obviously, we are still here talking now, it's 2023, so we did not die. But death became very real. Death became even clear in the visual aspects. Bodies were portrayed through the media around us. So I think that in my case, for instance, the full understanding of death with COVID-19 gave birth to existential posthumanism. So posthumanism can only be existential. So I would say that it's very important to embrace the notion of death, both biological and metaphorical, not as an ultimate answer. I'm not going to say that we must die to know who we are. I think that on some level we're always dying, and I think that on one level we're also immortal. We are everything, so we don't really die. Our energy can only transform, and even when we're talking about non-existence, it's still something that is part of us. Right now, I'm also not being, because I don't know what I'm going to be in 10 years from now. So I think that death is an important notion, both biologically speaking and metaphorically speaking.
Right, Francesca. With that, we come to an end of this wonderful, this brilliant, this highly motivating interface that we have had with you, that you have taken out time from your extremely busy schedule. I would like to thank the entire team and administration of Bankura University who has made this possible. My special thanks to my co-convener and co-coordinator of the Center for Research in Posthumanities, Sukhendu Das. Together, we are trying to make a dream come true. And Francesca, we would definitely love to host you in person sometime soon. If you ever pay a visit to India, I'm sure we are going to get connected. And at the same time, we wish health and happiness and productivity to you in days to come. And here's hoping that our posthuman futures are based on empathy, love, peace, and understanding. With that, I thank everyone related to this particular event. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you, Francesca.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah.
You incarnate energy.
Oh, Sukhendu, thank you so much. Subhadeep, thank you so much. Deb Narayan, thank you so much. All the people who have been here today with us, thank you so much for your presence. All the people who were not able to make it today for many different reasons, including maybe being in hardships, as we mentioned, to you, all our energy and presence. And the best of luck to the Center of Posthumanism at Bankura University. It's wonderful to have this new place to discuss and reflect. I will make sure that next time I come to India, we'll organize something memorable, as all our discussions have been since I've been knowing you, Subhadeep and Sukhendu. Thanks so much, everyone. We are here, we are connected, and we are in this manifestation together. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Yes.
Or night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.